I had been married to Jessica for 8 years, building what I thought was the perfect life with our two beautiful children in our suburban Chicago home. My younger sister Allison and her husband Brian lived just 30 minutes away, and we often spent weekends together as one big, happy family. But something changed after the last birthday party we hosted. I caught Brian staring at Jessica with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I brushed it off until yesterday, when Jessica came home with a pale face and trembling hands, whispering 4 words that would shatter our lives. "We need to talk, Thaddeus." Before I begin this horrifying story, let me know where you are watching from, and hit subscribe if you want to hear more real family stories like this one. The life Jessica and I built together was everything I had dreamed of since I was young. I had a stable job as an IT manager at a healthcare company, while Jessica worked as a financial consultant for a prestigious firm downtown. After 5 years of marriage, we finally saved enough for a down payment on our dream house in a quiet neighborhood with excellent schools for our kids. Thomas, our 7-year-old son, was a spitting image of me with his curious nature and love for building things. Emma, our 4-year-old daughter, had her mother's golden hair and infectious laugh that could brighten even the darkest days. Friday nights were sacred in our household. Jessica and I would prepare dinner together while the kids set the table. Then we would eat as a family before settling down for a movie night with homemade popcorn and hot chocolate. These simple traditions meant everything to us. My sister Allison met Brian at our wedding. She was my only sibling and maid of honor, while Brian was a college friend of my college roommate. They dated for 3 years, before getting married in a beautiful ceremony by Lake Michigan. I remember feeling so proud watching my little sister walk down the aisle, never imagining that the man waiting for her would eventually try to destroy both our families. The two couples became inseparable over the years. We celebrated holidays together, took annual summer trips to a cabin by Lake Michigan, and had monthly dinner rotations between our homes. Brian worked in the financial sector like Jessica, though at a different company. They occasionally discussed work matters, and Brian sometimes asked Jessica for professional advice, which seemed normal given their overlapping fields. The first unusual sign came about 6 months ago. Brian suddenly developed an intense interest in all of Jessica's projects. He would text her at odd hours, asking for her opinion on investments or market trends. These messages would come late at night, or on weekends, when family time was supposed to be sacred. I noticed but did not think much of it initially. Then, Jessica mentioned seeing Brian at a restaurant where she was meeting a client. He claimed he was there for a business lunch, but Jessica said it seemed like an odd coincidence. She also told me that Brian had confided in her about having marriage troubles with Allison. As her brother, I found it strange that Allison had not mentioned anything to me directly. A sense of unease began forming in the pit of my stomach, but I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps Brian just valued Jessica's financial expertise and saw her as a confidant during a rough patch with my sister. I wanted to believe the best in people, especially someone who was family. The situation grew increasingly uncomfortable when Brian gave Jessica an expensive silver bracelet for her birthday without consulting me. The gift seemed inappropriately personal, especially when my own sister received a much more modest present from him that same month. When I asked Allison about their relationship, she mentioned Brian had been working late more frequently and seemed distant, but attributed it to stress at work. One evening, while helping Brian set up a new phone app during a family dinner, I accidentally saw his photo gallery. Among family pictures were several saved images of Jessica from her social media accounts, isolated and saved separately. When I casually mentioned it, Brian quickly took the phone back, laughing it off as accidental downloads. Jessica later told me that Brian had been texting her more frequently, but she had been responding minimally to avoid creating tension in our family dynamic. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but I still had no concrete evidence that would justify confronting Brian or worrying my sister. I decided to pay closer attention to their interactions at our next family gathering, hoping my suspicions were merely paranoia. Unfortunately, I would soon discover they were entirely justified. The truth exploded into our lives on a Wednesday evening. Jessica was working late, finalizing a major client proposal. When she finally came home after 9 p.m., her face was drained of color, and her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hang up her coat. I knew immediately that something terrible had happened. She sat me down at our kitchen island, far enough from the bedrooms that our sleeping children would not hear. With a trembling voice, she recounted how Brian had shown up at her office just as most colleagues were leaving. He claimed he needed urgent financial advice, but as soon as they were alone, his demeanor changed completely. "He told me he's been in love with me since the day we met at your wedding," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said marrying Allison was partly because it would keep him close to me. Can you believe that Thaddeus, your sister, was just a means to an end for him?" The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Brian had not only betrayed my sister, but had been living a lie for 5 years, infiltrating our family with ulterior motives. Even worse, Jessica told me Brian had outlined an actual plan for them to be together. He suggested she leave me, claiming they were better suited intellectually and professionally. He had even researched places they could move to start fresh away from the family fallout. Jessica had immediately rejected him, ordered him out of her office, and threatened to tell me everything if he ever approached her again. Brian had left, but not before warning her that his feelings would not change, and that eventually she would see they were meant to be together. I paced our kitchen, rage and disbelief battling inside me. How could I have missed this? How many interactions had I misinterpreted over the years? While processing this bombshell, my phone rang. It was Allison crying because Brian had not come home and was not answering his phone. The weight of knowing the truth while my sister remained in the dark was unbearable. Jessica and I debated what to do. Should we tell Allison immediately, or confront Brian first? We worried about how this revelation would devastate my sister, who had built her life around a marriage that was apparently founded on deception. After much discussion, I decided to find Brian myself before involving Allison. I needed to look him in the eyes and hear him admit what he had done. I tracked Brian down at a local bar we occasionally visited for work happy hours. He was nursing a whiskey, looking not at all remorseful when I sat across from him. The confrontation that followed still haunts me. Rather than denying anything, Brian was defiant, almost relieved that everything was out in the open. "You have no idea how hard it has been seeing her every month," pretending he said with disturbing calmness. "I have watched every post she has made for 8 years. I know her better than you do, Thaddeus." When I reminded him of the commitment he had made to my sister, he simply shrugged. "Allison is a good person, but Jessica and I have a connection that transcends conventional relationships. She just does not realize it yet." The conversation grew increasingly alarming as Brian revealed the extent of his obsession. He had memorized Jessica's schedule, knew which clients she met regularly, and even tracked which coffee shop she visited each morning. When I threatened to tell Allison everything, his eyes hardened. "She will not believe you. I have been preparing for this possibility for years. Do what you want, but Jessica will eventually see that we belong together." I left the bar shaken to my core. This was not just an inappropriate crush or momentary lapse in judgment. Brian had been methodically observing my wife for years, while pretending to be a loving husband to my sister and a friend to me. Upon returning home, Jessica and I checked her phone, discovering dozens of messages from an unknown number that in retrospect clearly came from Brian using a separate phone. The messages started professionally but gradually included personal comments about her appearance or references to conversations that should have been private. Even more disturbing was Jessica's admission that Brian had approached her several times before with comments or touches that made her uncomfortable, but she had dismissed them to preserve family harmony. She also revealed that she had seen Brian parked near our children's school twice, claiming coincidental meetings in the area when she confronted him. While we were still processing these discoveries, Allison called again, increasingly frantic about Brian's whereabouts. I stood at a terrible crossroads, knowing the truth would shatter my sister's world, but keeping silent would only prolong a toxic situation. The situation exploded beyond our control the next evening when Allison came to our house unexpectedly, hoping to find Brian there. Instead, she walked in on Brian and me in a heated argument in our driveway as he had shown up uninvited to speak to Jessica again. The look of confusion on my sister's face quickly turned to horror as she pieced together fragments of our argument. I had no choice but to tell her everything, watching her collapse onto our porch steps as the reality of her marriage came crashing down around her. Jessica gently showed Allison some of the concerning messages Brian had sent, and my sister broke down completely. Between sobs, she revealed her own disturbing discoveries. That she had been too ashamed to share a hidden folder on Brian's computer, containing hundreds of photos of Jessica, copied from social media, family gatherings, and even some clearly taken without Jessica's knowledge. "I found them last month," Allison confessed. "I convinced myself they were innocent, that he was just organizing family photos. I feel so stupid now." But that was just the beginning of the nightmare. As we sat in our living room, Allison revealed increasingly troubling patterns she had noticed but suppressed. Before they were married, she had discovered Brian following an ex-girlfriend driving past her house repeatedly. He had explained it away as coincidence, and she had desperately wanted to believe him. More recently, she had found receipts showing Brian had paid a friend to report back on Jessica's activities during a business trip to New York. The most chilling revelation was a notebook Allison discovered hidden in their basement containing detailed notes on Jessica's daily routines, preferences, and even conversations Brian had overheard between Jessica and me. "I told myself he was planning some kind of surprise party," Allison whispered. "I knew something was wrong, but I could not face it." The situation deteriorated further when we involved our parents. My mother and father were horrified and immediately supportive. But Brian's parents reacted with denial and deflection. They suggested Jessica had somehow encouraged their son's attention, implying she had led him on professionally or even flirted with him at family gatherings. These accusations created additional pain in an already devastating situation. Our circle of friends fragmented as people were forced to take sides. Several mutual friends questioned why Jessica had not reported Brian's behavior, sooner implying she had enjoyed the attention on some level. These reactions felt like secondary betrayals piled atop the original trauma. The most painful development was Allison's conflicted feelings toward Jessica. While intellectually understanding that her sister-in-law was a victim emotionally, she struggled with misplaced resentment. "I know it is not rational," she admitted during a tearful conversation. "But sometimes I look at you and wonder what you have that I do not." This fracturing of family bonds was precisely what Jessica and I had feared, and it seemed Brian had calculated this potential outcome. Some family members suggested keeping the matter private to avoid scandal pressuring Jessica, to minimize what had happened to preserve family harmony. The suggestion that she should shoulder responsibility for maintaining appearances after being harassed was infuriating. The situation took a dangerous turn when Brian appeared at our house one afternoon when I was at work. Jessica was home with the children and called me in panic when she saw his car in the driveway. I called our neighbor, a retired police officer, to intervene while I raced home. Later that week, we discovered Brian had purchased 2 plane tickets to Seattle for himself and Jessica for a date she was scheduled to be at a financial conference. The implication that he was planning to somehow convince or coerce her into leaving with him sent chills down my spine. The final straw came when Jessica found anxiety medication in Brian's car after he had parked near our house again. Though he claimed it was for his own use, the timing and his previous behavior suggested far more sinister possibilities. Around the same time, he began making veiled threats about exposing secrets about me if Jessica continued to refuse to meet with him. There were no actual secrets to expose, but the implied blackmail attempt showed how desperate and unhinged he had become. The impact on our family was profound. Jessica had to request a leave of absence from work after Brian repeatedly appeared at her office. Thomas started having nightmares about the bad man taking Mommy away, revealing he had overheard more than we realized. Emma became clingy and fearful of male visitors. And Allison, my once vibrant and confident sister, became a shadow of herself, racked with self-doubt and humiliation. What had begun as an inappropriate confession had cascaded into a family security crisis that demanded immediate action. I realized I needed to take control of the situation to protect both my immediate family and my sister. First, I invested in a comprehensive security system for our home, including cameras covering all entrances and motion sensors that would alert our phones if anyone approached the property when we were away. Working with Jessica, we documented every inappropriate contact from Brian, saving messages, noting drive-bys, and recording dates of unwanted appearances. With this evidence, we consulted a lawyer who helped us file for a restraining order prohibiting Brian from coming within 500 feet of Jessica, our children, or our property. We changed our phone numbers, email addresses, and social media accounts, setting everything to private and accepting connections only from verified friends and family. I arranged for Thomas and Emma to temporarily attend a different school, and coordinated with their new teachers about the situation, ensuring no unauthorized adults could pick them up. While protecting my own family, I refused to abandon Allison. I helped her find an excellent divorce attorney who specialized in cases involving obsessive behavior. We offered her our finished basement as a temporary home, so she would not have to stay alone in the house she had shared with Brian, where so many disturbing items had been discovered. Together, Allison and I combed through years of financial records, emails, and other documentation, building a comprehensive case showing Brian's long-term obsession with Jessica. We uncovered evidence that he had installed tracking software on Allison's computer to monitor her communications with Jessica and had created fake social media accounts to follow Jessica's professional pages. I connected Allison with a support group for people who had experienced similar betrayals, and she slowly began rebuilding her sense of self-worth. The therapist she started seeing helped her understand that Brian's behavior reflected his own psychological issues, not any deficiency in her. After several weeks of gathering evidence and legal preparation, I arranged a meeting with both sets of parents present. Laying out the undeniable timeline of Brian's obsession and increasingly dangerous behavior forced even his parents to acknowledge the severity of the situation. They finally stopped defending their son and agreed to encourage him to seek professional help. Despite the restraining order, Brian made several attempts to contact Jessica through mutual acquaintances or by creating new email addresses. Each violation strengthened our legal case. When he parked on a street overlooking our backyard just outside the technical boundary of the restraining order, I reported it immediately. The police found him with binoculars and a camera with telephoto lens, resulting in his first arrest. I leveraged my IT background to work with colleagues in cybersecurity, identifying and blocking Brian's digital attempts to monitor Jessica. We discovered he had created elaborate networks of fake accounts to follow her professional activities and had attempted to access her work calendar through corporate system vulnerabilities. When Brian continued to violate the restraining order, the court took more serious action. He was arrested again, and this time held for psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation revealed concerning patterns of obsessive behavior, extending beyond his fixation on Jessica. The court mandated psychological treatment and electronic monitoring as conditions of his release. Throughout the legal proceedings, Allison maintained remarkable composure. She provided devastating testimony about the double life Brian had led, presenting evidence of his long-term deception that proved crucial to both the restraining order and her divorce case. The judge granted her petition for divorce, on grounds of extreme emotional cruelty, awarding her the family home and majority of their assets. Faced with mounting legal consequences and the unified front of both families, Brian finally began to understand the gravity of his actions. His lawyer negotiated a settlement requiring him to relocate to another state, continue mandatory psychiatric treatment, and maintain no contact with Jessica or our family. Any violation would trigger immediate consequences, including potential imprisonment. The day we received notification that Brian had indeed moved to Arizona represented the first time in months that Jessica slept through the night without waking in panic. We began the slow process of rebuilding our sense of security and normalcy. 1 year after Brian's final departure from our lives, our family had begun to heal in ways I had not thought possible during those darkest days. Jessica found a new position with a financial firm that allowed her to work remotely 3 days a week, giving her more time with our children, and eliminating the vulnerability of a daily commute to an office where she had felt exposed. Thomas and Emma gradually stopped asking when the scary man would return, though we maintained open conversations about appropriate boundaries and the importance of telling trusted adults when something does not feel right. Their resilience amazed and inspired me daily. Allison underwent the most remarkable transformation. After 6 months of intensive therapy, she began dating again, approaching relationships with new wisdom and healthy boundaries. She purchased a condo just 15 minutes from our home, and the bond between her and Jessica grew stronger than ever, forged in the crucible of shared trauma. Our extended family relationships required significant reconstruction. Brian's parents eventually sent Jessica a heartfelt apology for their initial reaction and for failing to recognize their son's problematic behavior earlier. Some friendships were lost permanently, but those who stood by us during the crisis became even more cherished. Jessica and I attended marriage counseling not because our relationship was failing, but because we wanted to process the trauma together and emerge stronger. We learned to communicate more openly about uncomfortable feelings and to trust our instincts about people and situations. The experience profoundly changed how I view human relationships and warning signs. I became much more attuned to power dynamics and boundary violations that I might previously have overlooked or excused. Jessica and I both became volunteer speakers at community workshops about recognizing stalking behavior and supporting victims of harassment. Allison found new purpose working with a nonprofit organization that helps women rebuild their lives after leaving manipulative relationships. Her personal experience made her uniquely qualified to connect with those still in the early stages of recovery, and watching her transform her pain into purpose became one of the most healing aspects of our family journey. I had to work through significant guilt for not recognizing the danger signs earlier. My therapist helped me understand that manipulators like Brian specifically cultivate trust and normalcy to mask their behavior. Learning to forgive myself became an essential part of moving forward. What I know now is that the facade of family harmony should never take precedence over addressing concerning behavior. Small boundary violations often precede larger ones, and the social pressure to maintain relationships can silence legitimate concerns. True family loyalty means protecting each other from harm, even when that harm comes from within the family circle. Sometimes the people we trust most are capable of causing the deepest wounds. But the important thing is not who tried to destroy your family, but how you choose to rebuild it. What would you do if someone threatened your loved ones right before your eyes? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone close to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to hear more stories of family resilience, and like this video if you believe in the power of standing up for those you love. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember to trust your instincts when something does not feel right in your relationships.